The year is 1666, and the world has gone quiet. Outside the stone walls of Woolsthorpe Manor, the silence is heavy, broken only by the occasional tolling of a church bell in the distance, a grim reminder of the great plague that is currently suffocating England. The universities have shuttered their doors, the bustling streets of London are empty, and here, in a darkened farmhouse in Lincolnshire, a 23-year-old college dropout named Isaac Newton sits alone in a room that smells of stale air and dried ink. He has been exiled by the pandemic, sent home from Cambridge to wait out the apocalypse. But while the rest of the country is paralyzed by fear, Newton's mind is racing at a velocity that threatens to consume him. He is not the revered genius with the long gray wig that history books will later paint him to be. He is young, socially awkward, and dangerously bored. He stares at the window, watching a single beam of sunlight pierce through a crack in the shutter. It cuts through the gloom, illuminating swirling dust motes that dance in the trapped air. For 2,000 years, the greatest minds in human history, from Aristotle to Descartes, have looked at that same beam of light and agreed on one absolute truth. White light is pure, divine, and fundamental. Color, they say, is merely a corruption of this purity, a degradation caused by interaction with earthly matter. Red is just light that has been damaged. Blue is light that has been weakened. Newton looks at the beam, and for the first time in history, someone dares to think, what if they are all wrong? The thought is heretical. It goes against the church, against the ancients, against common sense. But Newton is not a man of faith. He is a man of mechanism. He perceives the universe not as a divine painting, but as a clockwork machine. If light is a machine, it must have parts. It must have gears. And if he wants to understand how it works, he cannot just sit there and philosophize about it. He has to take it apart. But he has no laboratory. He has no assistants. He has no funding. The Royal Society is miles away, locking their doors against the plague. He is completely, utterly alone with his obsession. The isolation acts like a pressure cooker. He barely eats. He forgets to sleep. The sun rises and sets, and Newton remains in his chair staring into the light until his eyes burn. He realizes that his primary instrument of study is not a telescope or a lens, it is his own body, his own eyes. To understand vision, he realizes, he must stop looking at the world and start looking at the looking itself. He needs to breach the boundary between the observer and the observed. He paces the floorboards, the wood creaking under his anxious steps. The silence of the house amplifies the noise in his head. He needs proof. He needs to demonstrate that color isn't something that happens to light, but something that happens inside the perception of it. He looks around the room for a tool, something, anything that can help him probe this mystery. His eyes land on a small sewing kit on the table. He reaches out and picks up a bodkin, a thick, blunt needle used for punching holes in leather or threading ribbon. It is cold, hard silver. It is not a scientific instrument. It is a domestic tool, mundane and harmless in any other context. But in Newton's grip, it is about to become an instrument of radical, terrifying discovery. He sits by the window. The light is gray and flat, the afternoon fading into early evening. Newton holds the bodkin up to his face. The metal is smooth, tapering to a point that isn't sharp enough to draw blood easily, but narrow enough to slip into places it was never meant to go. He breathes in, the air hissing through his teeth. His heart is hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm in the quiet room. He knows, instinctively, that what he is about to do is incredibly stupid. It is reckless. It is the kind of curiosity that blinds men, quite literally. But the question, what is light, is louder than his fear. He lifts his hand. He positions the bodkin at the outer corner of his right eye. He doesn't aim for the pupil or the iris. Instead, he slides the metal point between the eyeball and the socket bone. He pushes. The sensation is alien, a dull, unnatural pressure as the metal intrudes into the orbital cavity. He feels the wet slickness of the eye's surface, the resistance of the muscle. He pushes deeper, as near to the backside of my eye as I could, he would later write in his private notebook. The needle is now wedged deep inside his skull, pressing against the curvature of the retina itself. He pauses, his hand trembling slightly. One slip, one sneeze, one sudden movement, and he could sever the optic nerve or puncture the globe of the eye. He would be left in darkness forever, a fool who blinded himself in a farmhouse. But he doesn't stop. He turns the bodkin. He presses the tip against the back of his eye, physically deforming the shape of the eyeball. And then it happens. There is no light in the room, or at least no new light entering his eye. But in his vision, a world explodes. He sees, as he describes them, several white, dark, and colored circles. Flashes of blue, rings of angry red, halos of spectral light bloom in the darkness of his vision. They are phantom colors, born not from the sun, but from pressure. He presses again. The colors shift. He releases. They fade. He is playing his own eye like an instrument. It is gruesome, nauseating, and utterly magnificent. The pain must be sharp, a warning signal screaming from his anatomy to stop, but Newton is in a state of cold, analytical ecstasy. He is proving that color is not a property of the object outside, it is a signal generated by the machine inside. The eye is not a window, it is a factory. It manufactures the reality he sees. He repeats the experiment, again and again. He sketches the circles he sees while the bodkin is still jammed in his socket. He notes the order of the colors. He treats his own biological safety with complete indifference, viewing his eye merely as a lens to be calibrated. Tears stream down his face, a reflex he cannot control, but his mind is crystal clear. In this terrifying intimacy between man and metal, the ancient dogmas are dissolving. Light is physical, vision is mechanical, and he has hacked the system. He withdraws the needle slowly, gasping as the pressure releases, blinking rapidly to ensure the world is still there. It is, but it looks different now. He has seen the machinery behind the curtain.
Newton withdraws the bodkin. He blinks once, twice. His eye waters profusely, red and irritated, throbbing with a dull ache that will likely last for days. He sits back in his chair, the adrenaline draining out of him, leaving him exhausted and trembling. The room looks the same, the dusty floorboards, the heavy curtains, the gray English sky outside, but the way he understands it has fundamentally fractured. He rubs his eye, checking his vision. It is still there. He has survived his own curiosity. This dangerous afternoon in 1666 doesn't immediately change the world. Newton, being Newton, tells almost no one. He buries the results in his notebooks, paranoid that others will steal his work or mock his methods. But the seed has been planted. The Bodkin experiment gave him the confidence to go further. If the eye is just a machine that processes signals, then light itself must be a physical substance that can be measured, split, and reassembled. Emboldened by the fact that he didn't blind himself, he moves from needles to prisms. He darkens his room completely, drills a tiny hole in his shutter, and directs that single beam of sunlight through a glass prism. He watches it splay out into a rainbow, the spectrum. And unlike everyone before him, he proves that the prism didn't create the colors were hiding in the white light all along. He had unlocked the code of the universe. Decades later, when he finally publishes Optics, the scientific community is rocked. The implications of his lonely, painful experiments ripple outward, shattering the Aristotelian worldview forever. But looking back, it is that moment with the needle that feels the most profound. It was the moment of maximum risk. It was the moment he decided that truth was more important than safety. Today, you are watching this video on a screen composed of millions of tiny pixels, red, green, and blue. The fiber optic cables carrying this data across oceans rely entirely on the physics of light that Newton began to unravel in that dark room. Your camera phone, the laser surgery that corrects vision, the telescopes peering into the deep cosmos, they all trace their lineage back to a bored, obsessive 23-year-old who was willing to jam a piece of metal into his own skull just to see what would happen. We often think of science as a clean, sterile process of equations and white coats, but at its heart, it is a raw, human struggle. It is the desperate need to know, to peek behind the veil of reality no matter the cost. Newton's eye eventually healed, but the vision he gave us remains. He showed us that the world is not what it seems, and that sometimes, to see the light, you have to be willing to touch the darkness. What are you curious enough to risk everything for? Subscribe to Microscope. We'll see you in the next moment.